Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Sean Conley is a former professional football player who was a kicker with the Detroit Lions, Indianapolis Colts, New York Jets, and finally, the Scottish Claymores in Europe. That journey came with a price. As a result of overtraining, Sean suffered career-ending injuries. As part of his rehabilitation and regrouping, Sean became a dedicated yoga practitioner at the suggestion of his wife, Karen, a yoga instructor. He and his wife now own Amazing Yoga in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sean is the author of the Amazon bestseller Amazing Yoga, which he wrote in 2010. He's also the author of The Point After, How One Resilient Kicker Learned There Was More to Life Than the NFL. Sean has written for numerous publications, including Yoga Journal, and has been featured on dozens of podcasts. He has worked with professional sports teams, including the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the University of Pittsburgh basketball team. Sean Conley, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks for having me, Casey. I'm excited to be here.
It is such an honor. I thought for sure that we would spend this hour talking about football and talking about yoga and meditation and mindfulness. We're not talking about any of that. I want to talk for an entire hour about the Conley Ice Complex. I saw the picture on Facebook of your backyard ice rink, and I just want to talk about that for an entire hour, and hopefully at the end of it, I want an invitation to come and skate there.
Oh, man. Well, it's funny that you bring that up because my son just asked me the other day if we're going to build it again. Yeah, we started, he would watch these videos on YouTube starting maybe like 5 years ago of these guys up in Canada building essentially their entire backyards into ice rinks. So we started small, and then every year he wanted it bigger and bigger. And then the last couple of years, it's pretty much taken up the whole yard. He's had like 3-on-3 hockey matches back there. And then we add we put the Penguins flag up, and then it's the Olympic flag, and then we pipe in the music, and but I don't know if this is going to happen this year, but
oh no, it has to happen. It's so cool. The Pittsburgh Penguins are one of my favorite teams, and we're just outside of Salt Lake City, and so we hosted the Olympics, and so that's really special to us. So I definitely noticed all of those things. It's kind of a bummer around here. We don't really get a lot of opportunities to play pond unless we're going up in the mountains. It doesn't really get cold enough in the valley to skate outside, and it's always something that I cherish when I get to do it. Hockey's my favorite sport, so we could just talk about the Penguins and your ice complex all hour. Well, unfortunately for me, we do need to talk about you and your career and all your amazing work. Can you tell the listener a little bit about your kind of improbable journey to becoming a kicker in the NFL?
Yeah, for sure. My dream for playing the NFL started very young. When I was 8 years old, my father encouraged me to do a punt, pass, and kick contest. I was already just kicking the ball in the backyard, and I entered it, came in third place, and I just became hooked. And it was interesting because I never played. I never played in high school because I was involved with so many different sports. I had this crazy notion. Well, now looking back, I guess it wasn't as crazy as I thought, that I would just kick on the side. So I would just walk down. There was a field just a few blocks from my house, and it was just this field that was just, I don't know if I could even call it a field. It was just stone and gravel. And, going back to the hockey thing, in Erie, Pennsylvania, where it would snow starting in November and you wouldn't see the grass again until about April. So
wow.
I would spend half the year kicking on snow, but it turned out that, kicking on these terrible conditions, so to speak, snow, ice, gravel, by the time I got to college and I was able to kick on these beautifully manicured fields, it was so easy for me. But that part was always easy. The actual kicking, the part that was hard was just getting a shot. I first went to a Division III school where, I showed up for the first day of the practice, and the coach decided that they didn't need me. They already had enough kickers on the team. So I left that school. Then I went to another Division III school, and I believe 4 for 18 was my numbers. I was one of the worst kickers in all of college football, but I was just so passionate about it, and I could still kick the ball really far, but just not straight. Luckily for me, I had one more year of college eligibility left, and I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and they already had 6 guys on scholarship. So I was number 7, but I was a walk-on, so a non-scholarship guy. And luckily, from spring ball to the first game, I worked my way up from 7 all the way to the starting kicker, and had a really good season with Pitt. And then I was lucky enough to get offered a contract by the Lions once the season ended. That's pretty much the story in a nutshell.
That's amazing. 7 kickers? I thought teams only had like 1 or 2.
Yeah, for sure. Like in the NFL, there's just one kicker and one punter, unless they have a kicker who just does kickoffs. But in college, what they do typically is they'll bring in a kicker every year because they're just like they do quarterbacks, because you have no idea. It's a crapshoot how good they'll be once they get to college. They could be this one of the best kickers in high school, but once they get to college, they have to kick off the ground. Instead of kicking in front of 3,000 people, now they're kicking in front of 60, 70,000 people. So they give out multiple scholarships. So if one doesn't pan out, there's somebody else in the wings that can step up and be their kicker.
Wow, that's amazing. For the listener, can you maybe describe the difference between kicking and punting?
Yeah, absolutely. So punting is what you do on 4th down when you're too far away from the end zone. So it's approximately like a 14-yard snap. The guy catches it and then he drops it and then kicks it that way. The kicker is the guy who will kick it off the ground just 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage, either an extra point for 1 point after a touchdown or 3 points for a field goal when they're close to the end zone. But because it's 4th down and they have too much to get on the last play, then they'll kick a field goal. So the kicker does the field goals and the kickoffs and the extra points, and the punter does the punts.
Wow, perfect explanation. You describe in your book the point after playing Notre Dame. Not many people get that opportunity. How special was that for you?
Yeah, that was probably like the pinnacle of my college career, because for a multitude of reasons. Number one, that was like my childhood dream team. Going back to when I was growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania, it was a very, very Catholic town at the time. And my dad was a Notre Dame fan, even though Notre Dame was 8-9 hours away. And so that's what we watched. That's who we rooted for. And so, but when I looked to play in college football, I never got a look from them or anything like that. So I went to Pitt. And so for me to play against Notre Dame, that was a big deal. And for me, where I found out much later is when I played against Notre Dame that day, the Detroit Lions were at the game. We had a bunch of scouts because we were playing Notre Dame. They had a bunch of guys that were NFL level, so to speak, and as did Pitt. So they were there watching, and that was the game where they actually, the scouts, they sit up in the stands, they take their notes. And, that was the game that I had a really good game that they noticed me. And then they're the team that offered me the contract on the day of the draft.
Wow. So as you're in college, this may be like a kind of stupid question, but as you're in college and playing for Pitt, is your dream to go to the NFL? Or are you just kind of thinking at this point, like, this is amazing, I love kicking, and as soon as this is done, I'm going to do business or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it was always NFL or bust. And that helped drive me a lot. Like, that was the reason why I transferred from Division III to Division I, because at Division III, there's rarely NFL scouts. So to make that jump, it happens once in a blue moon. So for me, that's why I went to Pitt, because my dream was to play in the NFL where I'd have scouts go there. But that was something that I looking back, because that was always my dream. It ended up hurting me to some extent, because when my career ended prematurely, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I did have my degree, but because I put so many of my eggs in I'm going to play in the NFL basket someday, I was left, I really struggled with my identity when my career ended much sooner than I expected to be. Yeah, but for me, it was always the NFL. And I think, there's, like I said, that definitely like drove me. And I trained really hard, but it came at a price where I had the reason why my career did end so early is because of overtraining. I would just, wake up and I would make sure that I got my lifting in. I'd make sure I got my kicking in, and I ended up kicking way too much, and that's why at the age of 25, my leg. It just ran out. And kicker is a position that, you can play into your 40s if you're taking care of your body. But for me, because I was just so driven, without any balance along the way, that I physically petered out at a much earlier age than I should have.
Wow. I mean, it doesn't sound that different from like a baseball pitcher or something, where it's like you have this number of pitches that you can throw in your life, and if you're not well managed, you're going to pitch yourself out very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so I work today, like, I get texts, every once in a while from parents who have a kid who's trying to be a kicker. And, so and they send me their videos, and I work with their videos. And that's always my number one advice to them is if you're going to train, it doesn't have to be quantity, it has to be quality. I was way over the top, where I would actually go to the field and I'd open up my little notepad, and I would put down like 100 kicks. I'd kick 10 from the 20-yard line, and 10 from the 30, and 10 from the 40. And no matter how my leg felt, I just kept kicking and kicking and kicking. I tried to turn it into like some sort of like little science project. But now when I work with kickers, it's just like, hey, it's just quality. Make sure you're getting rest, and because the position of kicker is, I don't want to say it's simple, but once you figure out how to be accurate, it's all mental at that point. And so for me, like, I just kept on driving, thinking if I kept kicking, I kept training, I'd be able to kick the ball further. But at some point the opposite happened.
Interesting. So as you're transitioning from college to NFL, what things change as far as like, the pressure or the training in the NFL versus just at the college level?
Yeah. The one thing that stood out for me that really changed is when I got to the professional level, it was, for the other players, the other positions, it was all about the little details. Like, you would see players who were like second, third round draft picks, top picks. And just because they couldn't do the little things, next thing you know, like they would be cut. That's what separated them. But also it was just maintaining your health more than anything, because that's the players at that level are so close athletically. It's just, being able to stay healthy and to also keep your mind in the game. That was the other thing that separated players too, the ones that could bounce back after making a mistake, either in practice or in the game, because you would see some players who just have a really hard time with that. That was like some of the best advice that I ever got when I was in the NFL was from Jim Harbaugh, who's now the coach of the University of Michigan. I missed a field goal at this practice when I was with the Colts, and this was a public practice where they had all the fans come in, and I missed like a 45-yarder. And I remember just like my body language that I was upset, and he just gave me like 20-second, like his little bits of wisdom, saying, hey, like, you have to have if you're going to make it in the NFL, you have to have a really short memory. And that really stuck with me, because it just made, that it was a great, something to think about just in life in general, just not holding on to things like that. But that's what would happen to a lot of the younger players, the ones that could just move on quickly and get back out there. And then players who would, make a mistake, and then they would just go down the road of negativity.
Mm. That is a really great piece of advice. It's almost like, you're either winning or you're learning, and you're using, the mistakes or the things that seem to be going wrong for, bettering yourself for next time. I really love that. I don't think your paths crossed in Detroit. You never played with Scott Mitchell, did you?
No, he was after me. Right.
After you. Okay. I got that right. Okay. Awesome. So my dad does sports here in Salt Lake City for a local TV station. And so he's pretty good friends with Scott Mitchell. And I've heard secondhand through Scott Mitchell a few things that are very, very interesting. And I would love for you to comment on the level of intelligence that you need to be a pro football player. Because I think a lot of people watch this stuff on TV and think it's just a bunch of big dudes and they're just running at each other. Or like in a huddle, okay, John, I'm going to hand you the ball and you're going to run probably to the right, and so everybody just find a dude and like push him out of the way. Like, can you explain the complexity of the sport to somebody who might not appreciate it?
Right. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Like going back to what I said is really like the next difference, because the thing is when you go from high school to college to pro, the speed of the game keeps going higher and higher. And so the players have just seconds to make a decision. Everything happens so quick. For example, when I kick a field goal for my position, from the time that the ball is snapped, and to I have to kick it or a kicker has to kick it is 1.2 seconds. And the reason why you just have 1.2 seconds is because the guys on the ends, they're so fast. They're usually sprinters, and many of these guys were probably high school all-stars in track and so forth. So you have 1.2 seconds to kick that ball. From there, the same thing is with, it'll be blocked on the side or there'll be penetration down the middle. And the same goes with the quarterbacks. They only have a couple seconds to make a decision. So all these positions, whether you're a lineman, quarterback, kicker, your training has to be so good and your confidence has to be so good that you really can't think. That was, one common thread when I remember talking to other players about this is like, when you're out there, like you just have to trust your instincts. You have to trust your training, because there really is not much time to think out there and second guess yourself. You have to be in some sort of flow, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Wow. It's just so cool to think, like, when Tom Brady steps up to throw a pass after, the huddle, he didn't call one play. He called like an entire suite of plays. And if one cornerback has his foot turned out 3 degrees, or the linebacker like glances to the left or something, that can tell you a whole lot about what's going to happen in the actual play. It's crazy.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. When you watch Brady, he sees everything. Like, his vision is unbelievable. And I think he makes a lot of his decisions before he even snaps the ball. He looks at like certain matchups, and his homework is so good. He knows the tendencies of specific players on defense. He knows who can be easily beat or so forth. But that's what makes these players so good, is when they can actually, before the play even happens, know what the guy on the other side of the ball is going to do.
Crazy. What about the business of the sport? What things kind of surprised you about the business of NFL as a whole? I mean, how did they treat the individual players? Were they treated well, or was it just kind of turn and burn as far as personnel?
Yeah, when I was there for my first week, my first training camp was with the Detroit Lions, and I came back to practice, back into the locker room after practice one day. It could have been more than a week or two into training camp, and the guy's locker next to me was emptied out. All of his stuff was gone, his duffel bag and everything. And I asked the player, a couple lockers down, I said, "Hey, what happened to so and so?" And he said, "He's gone. Don't you know what the NFL stands for?" And I said, "No." He says, "Not for long." And, the players they just come and go. And, I'm very thankful, to the NFL and the opportunities it gave to me. But in terms of it's a pretty tough business. And, one thing that really surprised me was, growing up watching all these NFL players, I always thought like the most important thing for these players was winning. And there's certainly that, these players, still want to win, but, with most of my conversations with them, if they're being really honest, like they just wanted to be able to be healthy at the end of the day. They, it was a job, they wanted to get paid, and they wanted to be healthy, during season. And, they talked about their future. They want to be healthy when it's over. They want to be able to, play with their kids, get down on the floor and, crawl around with their kids. They want to be able to go golf, and they want to be able to go hiking, and, whatever it may be. And the safety of the players, certainly, it could be improved dramatically in terms of the players' well-being. And it's definitely improving. They've made some changes recently, but it's taking a long time to get where we're at now. And there's still a lot more things that can be done for player safety and health and just overall mental well-being.
Is it true that the average NFL career is still around like 3 years?
The last I've seen of it was 2.3, and 2.3. One of the reasons, for the NFL's retirement package, the last I checked, is you had to be in the NFL for 3 years. And then during those 3 years, you had to play, I believe it was 2 games to count in a season, to count for a full season. And, because so many players, the bulk of the players, have far more in common with me than they do someone like a Tom Brady, that they're only in there for 2.3 years. I know a lot of guys who were in that range who did not get a pension because they played in played in 1990, 91, and didn't get back into 92, but they won't get a pension, but they have like serious knee issues or brain issues or something. And so like, unfortunately that number 2.3, the number of players that have come through the NFL, that's like the highest percentage of bulk, that we see. And I think, when we watch the NFL, it's so easy to get caught up in all the big names, but really the most of the players are in and out.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I've also heard this too. I'm not sure if this is true. Maybe you can comment on this. Since it is such a business, we look at it as fans as like, this is a sport. Every team is trying to win. They want to get to the Super Bowl. But, if you look at teams that are like always just kind of mediocre and they never really get in, I hate to call them out, but like maybe like the Chicago Bears or like Miami Dolphins, like as a franchise, you're going to sell 70,000 tickets every single week. You're going to sell millions and millions of dollars of merchandise. I don't see a lot of drive for every team to be like excellent. Mediocre teams seem like they're totally fine printing money, just being mediocre. And, every few years you fire a coach or get a new quarterback or something and just keep that rolling. Is that something you noticed?
Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, there's something to be said. Like, I'm here in Pittsburgh, and they've been successful for as long as I can remember. And I think what it is like certain organization, because I believe it all starts from the top, are just able to make sure that they have the right people in place. I mean, like teams like the Steelers have always had a successful coach, and a lot of these teams just can't seem to get it right. With their head coach. And I think that's everything. When you go around the league and you look at the most successful organizations, they're the ones who know how to hire the right coach. And, some teams it's just constant. They get it wrong, like time and time again. And how to hire the right coach. I have no idea. If I knew that, I'd have a different job, but it just seems like some teams are able to do their homework and make the right choice. And I think a lot of teams too, like stick with the right guy. Even like the Steelers with like Mike Conley's had a few years where like he missed the playoffs or he's been bounced early, but the Steelers have stuck with him. And I think the NFL, some of these teams, like the guy goes 11-5, 10-6, and then 4-12 or whatever, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make any sense.
That's a really, really hot seat. That's crazy. You basically pulled a reverse Ted Lasso. Rather than a football coach going to coach soccer in Europe, you went to go play football. I'm assuming that's because injuries were already accumulating. But what was it like to play football, in Europe?
Oh, it was a ball. It gave me a chance to like really play. When I was in the NFL, it was always always about the job. I hope I make this job, and I was always going up against another kicker, and I was, you need the other kicker, unfortunately, to not perform so well, so you can take his job. So the whole training camp going up against another kicker was always like it wasn't really like a fun situation. But when I was in Scotland, this was a league where it was the players like myself, I guess you could say, who were like marginal guys who had experience in the NFL but weren't on rosters. Like my team had a lot of guys from the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jets, and we're all on this team together. And it was nice because at this point in my career, I was starting to really see that this was so much more than a business than just a game. But the players that I played with, because of the pay was, I believe at the time I got $1,000 a week. So it was very low paid compared to the NFL. The players that were on the roster just were there for the love of the game. So it was nice at that part of my career to just to play for fun. And if I made the NFL, it was great. That was still my goal, was to get back into the NFL, but it was great just to like play, because there was such a newness to it as well with the fans, because the NFL was new in Scotland, it was new in Spain and Germany. And so you go to these games and the fans, they didn't even know the right time to root. That always cracked me up, because they if I kicked an extra point, they would cheer louder for that than the touchdown because it was like a kick and it was more like rugby or soccer. So like being a kicker, they thought it was like such a big deal over there.
I love that. That's so cool. I've heard that like if you watch a hockey game in Toronto, like everybody has such hockey knowledge that it's a little bit more subdued than if you go to Nashville and it's just like a freaking party and they might not know as much about the game as somebody in Toronto, but they just have a great time with it. That sounds really fun.
Right.
Man, so when did it start to occur to you that your career was going to be over earlier than you had liked?
Yeah, I mean, it started a little bit before I went to Scotland when my second stop was with the Indianapolis Colts, and when I was in training camp, when you kick field goals like at the NFL level, like you have to be able to kick 50, 55, 60-yard field goals. Otherwise, that's just like not NFL level. And during training camp, I started coming up short with those long field goals, which, college, that wouldn't be a big deal. But the NFL, you have to, if you're not going to make them, you better at least have the distance. So during practice, I started coming up short and I started to see that something was going on with my endurance, which didn't really make any sense to me. I still understand why, hey, I trained for so long that, why am I getting weaker? And so meanwhile, what was happening was I was just overtraining, and my hip was starting to degenerate, but I just didn't know it. My next stop was with the Jets, and that was pretty much the end of it because the same thing happened. My kickoffs, when you kick off the ball in the beginning of the game from the 30-yard line, it's expected that you kick it all the way into the end zone, which is about 72, 73, 75 yards at least. And my kickoff started landing like in the field of play, like around the 2-yard line or the 3, which was like unacceptable. So I knew something was going on. And so one day I went to see the team physician, and he gave me like an exam. He started poking around on my thigh, and he kept staying in the same spot right where my waist meets my thigh. And he says, I can't feel the muscle. He says, your hip flexor is gone. And so that's actually what happened was my hip flexor degenerated. And that was from kicking thousands of footballs and just overtraining. So it was never an issue that I never, it wasn't my accuracy. It wasn't my confidence that did me in. It was the overtraining. So that was pretty much the beginning of the end. I tried to hang on for a while. And that's when I went overseas to play in Scotland because I thought there'd be some sort of miracle. My hip would somehow regenerate. But that never happened.
Wow. So how did you handle all of that? Because I think, if I were in your shoes and had gone through that process, the level of darkness and depression, it would be very deep. Let's just say that. What was it like for you to all of a sudden, think you have a long career playing professionally to being on the couch? Like, what does that feel like?
Yeah, that was hard. I was stuck for a couple of years. I think because I always had this mindset that I'd be in the NFL. And then when I did make the NFL with Detroit, I thought that, hey, I made it. This is what I've always wanted. This is who I am. I'm an NFL football player. So when that ended, there was a few years where I was pretty stuck. I really didn't know what to do with myself. I was pretty down. Because I realized I just put so much into that identity. Luckily for me, my wife was very, very supportive of my whole football process, and she, like when it ended, she reminded me like, hey, there's more to life than football. There's more that you can that you can offer, and when I see players today who seem to be hanging on to their career, I believe they're going through the same process where they've just put so much into that identity that they can't see themselves doing anything else. They've dedicated so many hours of their lives to being an athlete. And then when it ends suddenly, because, rarely does an athlete's career end on their own terms. Usually it's, similar to mine, where it's an injury, or their level of play has just dropped off, and then they're discarded, they're cut. So it took me a while to get all to move past that, but it wasn't something that just happened overnight. But looking back now, and in some ways, I'm glad my career did end when it happened, because then it happened earlier in my career, and I was able to move on and eventually find other things that I was passionate about. It just took me a while to get to that point.
Wow. You use the word identity, and yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It just seems like a complete, crisis of your ego, thinking you're this person and realizing like that was a false construct that you made in your mind. You're just you and experiencing different things at different times of your life. And I can see how that would be a very, very difficult place to be. And you managed to get out of it. So I'm really curious, what things did you start to learn and discover about yourself that helped you realize that there was more to life than just being, in the NFL?
Yeah, well, one thing that did happen that I forgot to mention is when I was with the Detroit Lions earlier in my career, I ran into Barry Sanders, who was like the Hall of Fame running back for the Detroit Lions. And we were in London, we were playing the Dallas Cowboys for an exhibition game. And I went out partying with the other rookies, what the rookies do. And I came back one night, and he was sitting there in the lobby, and he was reading like a little paperback. And I just sat down and talked, and we became like, training camp buddies, where we played catch every day during training camp. So we had somewhat of a relationship, and I sat down with him, and the conversation came up about, football and career. And I shared with him my concerns about like being cut by the Detroit Lions, what next. And he said to me, "Hey, one thing you can never forget. And that is there's more to life than the NFL," which ended up being like my, subtitle for the book. But he told me this, but I remember when he told me that, I didn't really believe him. Because I thought, well, what else could there be in life than, playing football? Because that just to me always seemed like that was like that I'd reached the top, and there was nothing more than that. So, fast forwarding, like when my career ended, I think what really helped me was just starting to spend some time about like, what else am I also passionate about? Because, football was something I was just so passionate about that just always, really like made my heart sing, so to speak. It was something like whenever I did, I just felt like I was just, truly in the moment whenever I played. And so I believe that's what really helped, because I just would start to think about other things that I could do that could, make me give me that same sort of feeling, which eventually led me to fast forward into teaching yoga. Because what happened was, because my career ended due to injuries, I got into practicing yoga, and yoga not only helped me physically, with my football careers, but also helped me with my mind. And one thing I never really expected that it would help me with, it did help me, let go of my career, and also helped me when my career ended at the same time my father passed away. So those both happened, within months of each other. And I discovered that like through a practice of yoga and mindfulness that I could be more in the present moment. So I got really excited about teaching yoga. I thought, well, hey, this is something that helped me move on from my career. Maybe I should share it. And at first I didn't want to do it full time, but eventually I did do it full time, because I just thought, hey, like if this is something that, worked really well for me, that maybe this could be my calling, maybe to help give back. And so other people who have challenges with her identity, maybe making career changes or something that would happen, like losing a loved one, like with my father, that this practice could help them. So that's what led me to teaching. And now 20 some years later, I'm still doing that. And that's really like the where the passion for my current career comes from.
Wow, that's incredible. Cool advice from Barry Sanders. I put him with like Bo Jackson of like incredible athlete who could have done amazing things, but the career got ended, a little too soon. Most people, I can relate to this totally myself. Most people get into yoga because, we're going to bend and move, and I'm going to be flexible, and I might get a little sweaty, and then I get to lay down afterwards, and, it's going to improve my flexibility. But most people that I come in contact with, and myself included, like we stay with yoga, not necessarily for the physical benefit, but for the mental benefit. And that certainly sounds like that's the case with you. Can you describe what it is specifically about yoga that allows the mind to kind of, reform itself and relax, and we achieve greater states of mindfulness?
Right. 100%. And this is always the hardest question to answer when people ask me about yoga. Because, when I first got into yoga, I'll just use my experience as an example. I was not sold on anything beyond physical. Like you mentioned, I knew it could help me with my back and all that other stuff. But where it can help you with your mind is when you're doing these poses, that the only way that you can relax in the poses, because they're hard. Like, let's say you're doing a pose where you have your hand, like triangle pose, just a basic pose that someone can try to imagine is like when you have your right leg straight and you try to reach your hand down, your left arm reaches up. That if you hold that pose for a while, the only way that you can do it calmly is if you focus on your breath. And then if you focus on your breath, you're in the present moment. Because the only way, if we're breathing in and out of our nose and focusing on our breath, we can only do that if we're in some sort of state of relaxation. So that's what it can do. It can get us, so if I go to a yoga class and I'm thinking about like what happened at work and the stress or something that happens at home, but if I start to just focus on my breath, I have to do it consciously. Therefore, now I'm not thinking about what happened before I came to yoga. And so I think that's like, one way to describe it, where it can just get you out of your head, so to speak. So instead of thinking about the future or the past, like when you do yoga, you have to focus in on what's happening now. So the more you can start to practice this on your yoga mat, practicing being in the now, then that will happen when you're not on the yoga mat. That's how I try to explain it to, why do we do this? Because like in a yoga class, you do all these different poses and, it can be sweaty, it can be hard. And there's like, well, why are we doing this? Yeah, certainly the physical benefits, but the more you do it, those practices of being in those poses, being in the present moment, being calm, they'll eventually work its way into our nervous system where we can start to experience that not in a yoga class.
I am so glad you went there with that. That was when I think I truly learned the importance of the yoga class. Like, yeah, it's great if you can be mindful for this hour, but if you can be mindful when somebody cuts you off in traffic, or the time that you have with your pets or your family, your children, like all of that stuff gets enhanced. It almost just kind of leaks out into the rest of your life. I really love that. Do you have a favorite pose in yoga?
I would say if I had a favorite pose, it would be forearm plank. The one where you just come down on your forearms and you hold it for a long time. I like it because it's such a hard pose, but it's also very easy. And for me, even though my injuries I'm more injury free now than I was before. But for me, I just like to just do poses that I just hold for a while. So this one is really good because it's hard. And the only way you can stay in it for, let's say, a half a minute or a minute is you have no choice but to focus on the breath. So any pose that makes me focus on my breath, I'm all for it. That was one thing that took me a really long time to really grasp. My wife, that was my first experience with yoga, and she teaches classes. I remember saying, breathe in and out of your nose and all the other stuff, to the whole class. But I completely resisted it because I thought, well, breathing doesn't sound very effective. It doesn't sound like, what am I getting out of, breathing? Shouldn't I just be trying to stretch really hard? I had this old school football mentality where I thought I just would push. But then once I discovered that the breathing helped me find, balance where I was working, but not overworking, which completely something I lacked in my football career. That was like a breakthrough for me. And then I really started to grasp the breathing, but it took me a very long time to get to that point.
I love that. What a great and thoughtful answer. Planks suck. Planks are always hard. I don't care how fit you are. And all my clients know that pretty much every workout we do together, they're going to be doing some variation of a plank. So they're very familiar with that. My favorite pose is Shavasana. So for the listener the very end of a class, you finally get to like lay down and just relax. You know, the class is really challenging, and this pose can also be fairly challenging, but it's just the laying on your back and relaxing in that quiet few minutes is just so wonderful. And I remember explaining that to a yoga instructor, and I said something like, you know, why can't the entire class be Shavasana? That's by far the best part. And the answer that I got back, I thought was really thoughtful and amazing. And it made sense for yoga. And I think it makes sense for life as well. And said that, like, look, if you didn't go through the challenge of doing the entire class, you wouldn't appreciate the Shavasana at the end. And it was like a pile of bricks. Like, of course, that makes a lot of sense. But don't you think, you know, facing challenges with resilience and strength and persistence is where we gain, you know, the ability to enjoy the relaxation when we need to just be rather than do?
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Spot on. When I teach, my hope is that the people taking the class find it hard. And I hope that they find moments where they have no choice, but to try to relax. Because if they just try to push through it, when they get to the end of the class, they won't have that experience that you just mentioned in Shavasana. But if they're working and also bringing some of the breath when they get to that point in Shavasana, they can just really have that moment where they can just soak it in and just release. And yeah, now that I think more about it, Shavasana probably is my favorite pose as well because of exactly what you said. And I think without going through the challenge, when we have that point to just at the end to completely surrender, it just doesn't work that way. You know, like the saying is, like, if it doesn't challenge us, it doesn't change us. But I think, you know, to go through that fire, you know, where we're like, wow, this is a really uncomfortable moment. So I'm gonna do what I've always done to get through it, and that's either to push through it or force through it or avoid it, which is another option. But when they face the challenges with mindfulness, relaxation, that's, I think, where the learning process can really, really happen in yoga.
I love that. So how do we know? How do we know when to push, and how do we know when to just be and relax? That's a really tough thing to know how to balance, not only in a yoga class, but also in life.
Yeah, for sure. You know, one way that I think to look at that, like even like in a yoga pose, is like, you know, if you're in a yoga pose and now it's not, you're not just feeling discomfort, like a healthy challenge, but you're actually feeling pain. And I think back to like my football career when I was training, I there was many times when I would train where I'd feel pain, but I'd just keep going. But knowing now, like with mindfulness, you know, it shouldn't have been, I shouldn't have had to feel pain. It was nice to like challenge my body. But if it ever got to the point where I was feeling that, you know, that's like not something that's healthy. And I think where we could take these lessons on the yoga mat into life is like, if I'm in a relationship that is toxic, that all that's happening is I'm feeling pain. You know, this isn't for me. This isn't something that I need to like continue to stick out, or if I'm at a job that's what's happening, where it's, yeah. Cause I think there's certainly something good about sticking things out as you mentioned, but like the difference could be like, when it's now it's hurting me or it's hurting others. Now it's the time to step off, to step out.
That's very well explained. Another lesson I've learned in yoga, and I'm so grateful for the instructor who taught me this, you know, you're in triangle pose and you go to warrior one or whatever. And it seems like, okay, well, I'm just going to go from this one pose to the next as quickly as possible. And once I'm in that pose, like I've reached my goal. And this instructor, John, a really good friend of mine, taught me that, like, no, the movement in between the transitions is just as valuable as being in a pose. And again, it's such a wonderful lesson for yoga and having that intent of moving, you know, slowly and with control to the next pose, but also in life, we're just rushing around, checking boxes and trying to get this next thing or this next item or this next job promotion. And it's like, you're missing the middle. The middle is where the joy is.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. You know, we talk about that in our classes too. Like, is to try to, because it's so easy when you do like the yoga in America is mostly vinyasa yoga, where it's next pose, next pose, next pose, next pose. And if our mindset is, okay, I'm in this pose, but I can't wait to go to the next one, then the next one, the next one, all we're doing is reinforcing this habit of what's next, what's next, what's next. And so, we try to teach the poses when you come into them, move into them just as you would if you're in it, like, which is mindfully. And then when you're in it, there's no rush to be in the next one. Can you actually feel what you're feeling right in this moment? And so we try to stress that as much as we can. The more we can practice this on our yoga mats is feeling what's happening right now than when we're not in our yoga mat and we're home. Instead of like, I'm going to rush to this next thing, maybe then we can just catch ourselves. The first step is, being just aware when we go back into the habit of next, and we can just focus on where we are, right now. I remember this was a challenge for me when I first started. We have 4 kids, and when they were younger, I remember like being in the car with them, and they would start to, tell me about their day at school, and I would catch myself, not listening to them, like, and then, what I had to do next. I wasn't even listening to them, and I think it was, what yoga has taught me is like when someone's listening to really be listening. And I think that's like always the first step that we can take from any sort of yoga, meditation, mindfulness practice is catch ourselves when that old habit comes up of moving on to the next thing and bringing us back to like what's happening right now. And the more we can do that, like it's like a skill we can get better and better at over time.
I love that. I'm so glad you are teaching that. I think it's such a valuable lesson. You mentioned parenting, and you also mentioned losing your father. I lost my mother several years ago and know how difficult that can be. But it's interesting. There's silver linings. As bad as it sucks, there's things that you learn and grow from if you allow the process to kind of purify you. So I wonder, how has the process of mourning the loss of your father helped you to become a better parent?
Yeah, what I was most surprised at that eventually I felt a lot of gratitude for from my father. And even though he died when he was young, he was 59. Because I remember when he first passed away, there was no sense of gratitude. It was anger over like his disease and the hospital and everything. And like I just never thought I could ever get there. But that's what I think is really, what I learned the most about is being grateful that for the time that I did have with them, even though I feel like it was nowhere near long enough. And so I try to bring that into my, parenting as well as like with my kids, is try to spend as much time with them as I can and cherish every moment, because they grow up fast and we have no idea what's around the corner in life. So it's just that constant sense of cherishing every moment with them.
Yeah, it's such a paradox that death can be the greatest instructor for all of us. Again, if we allow ourselves to be, improved by the process. Your book, The Point After, has all kinds of praise, lots of accolades, 5-star reviews. What would you want somebody to take away from that book?
Well, I think when I wrote the book, there was a handful of different themes, but I think the theme that I've probably got the most positive feedback in it is the whole concept of identity, that we're so much more than the labels we put ourselves on. And when I wrote this book, my hope was that it transcended just a football book. And so there's certainly a lot of stories in there about my football experience, but every football experience I wrote, I tried to write it in a manner of, to bring out the emotions that I was feeling and to really be honest and vulnerable, so anybody could relate to this, to anything that they've, whatever their career is or the challenges that they've had, that they could find something to relate with. So I think it's just the idea of these labels that we put ourselves on, that they are just that they're just labels, and to be open to what the possibilities out there, because what I spent way too much time on throughout my career was looking at this closed door of opportunity, which in my mind I thought was a closed door. I had regret. I look back at my career, like how I could have changed it, how it could have been different, and why is my career like this? And I think whenever I did that throughout my career, I was missing out on opportunities that were out there. So that's probably like my biggest hope of the book, is so that we can, spend much less time on how things go bad for us in life, and be open to, what we have right now.
Such an amazing lesson. Is there a piece of, accolade or a review or something that stands out in your mind as something that's really special, or a life that you impacted by writing that book?
Yeah, what's been most surprising for me is how many young people have read the book, and I'm not sure how it got in their hands. I don't know if it was the parents read it first and then the kid, but I've heard from a lot of parents and teenagers who are high school athletes who just found the book to be very reassuring for them, where they're also in a similar path where they think that they have to make it big in college, their college sport, or they have to become a professional one day. And I think, a lot of them have read it and said that they're just going to look at like their athletic career in a different way. And that it's not all the end all be all, and that they're going to try to find some balance in their athletic careers beyond what they do on the field.
I love that. That's great. You also recently started a podcast. Podcasting is an absolute passion of ours over here. And in our sister podcast, we just started one called the How to Make a podcast. We asked the question from the very beginning, what is your why? Why are you doing a podcast? Because podcasting can be a lot of work, and your why ends up being your North Star of the reason, you're going to continue doing something when the going gets a little tougher than it currently is. So I'm just curious, what is your why for podcasting?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, my why is to help steer people who are open for to get into mindfulness. And I feel like I was one of the last people that would ever get into mindfulness, like with my football background, but it's helped me so much. And I've seen, over the years at our yoga studio, how it's helped so many people work with loss, with divorce, with stress, and injuries. And so, but I understand for a lot of people, it can be, there's obstacles to it or resistance to it. So my why is to, I have guests on, but also I'm also putting on some meditations myself. And that is just to make it as sound as, or present it as in an accessible way that, people who are thinking about getting into any of those yoga, mindfulness, meditation, that'll spark their interest. And maybe there'll be a guest on a show who will share a story that they will resonate with. And that may be the spark for them to, maybe get into mindfulness, or maybe it'll help them, because it's also very easy to fall off the mindfulness bandwagon. I know for me, when I first got into it, the first few years, I'd be into it, because I would doubt it. Like, oh, I don't think this is really helping me. But I realized it's just like anything, it takes time to really, really build up that habit. So I think having conversations around it, so people don't feel like they're alone. Because I think a lot of times it's easy for us to feel alone with our problems, and maybe, no matter what we're doing, that it's not helping our situation. But just to create that sense of community to help people, keep going and working on their, keeping their wellness, really high up there. I read somewhere that 90% of disease comes from stress, and most of us, when we work out, we work out just physically, but we spend very little time on taking care of our minds. And so that's probably the biggest part of the why is to keep that part of the conversation, the importance of taking care of our mind. And I really wasn't so into mindfulness in my younger days. I always thought it'd be all about fitness. But now that I'm in my 50s now, I spend far more time, I found, on mindfulness than like a hard workout, because as I'm getting older and I see other people, like my mom struggles with dementia now, and that's becoming way too common, that I think it's a good way to also prevent all these diseases of the mind. So there's multiple reasons in the why, but that's what it comes back to, is just to really spread the word of bringing some sort of mindfulness into our everyday lives.
That's a pretty strong why, my friend. I expect this podcast to go for a very long time. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I have a lot of friends in the yoga meditation world that I've had on so far. So we'll see. It's been a lot of fun. Like you said, it was a lot more work, so much more work to get it off the air than I realized. But or off the ground, excuse me. But once I got it off the ground, it's been fun. There's still some challenges with it week to week, but yeah, the beginning part was the hardest. But once I committed to it, that was the best part.
Totally. We had so much resistance to pushing record for the first time. I pushed it back weeks and weeks and weeks. It is pretty difficult to at least just put something out there and then make it better as you go along. So the name of your podcast, Happy Athlete. What kind of besides the obvious, like what kind of message are you trying to convey?
Yeah, so the happy athlete is there's going to be an athletic focus, I guess you could say, to it with myself being a former athlete, and a handful of the guests that I have on there are like former athletes who've now turned into yoga. So I'm trying to bring in a lot of those type of guests where, maybe it was an injury as well that got him into it, or, just how it helped them, overcome self-doubt. I think, the conversation is finally changing now with athletes, where I think we're not looking at them as just robots, like with the most recent Olympics. It's now like, hey, like there has to be, mental health and mindfulness has to be part of, every athlete's repertoire. It has to be part of their training regimen, and so I certainly want to bring in that part of that angle as well.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us about how you are working with people today. You have all kinds of different offerings on your website.
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of online stuff. That's been like a big shift for us. We have our in-person classes, but online we're doing pretty much everything from just a 20-minute yoga classes to 1 hour yoga classes, but we're also putting up a lot more meditations, and we have like meditation series. And also another good way for what's been really popular lately and helps get people into yoga is we do like 10-day challenges where you can go on to our online platform and you could just do 10 classes in a row that are also really short. Some of them are just 20 minutes. I think that's also a really good way to get into it. We find that the magic number to stick with yoga is around 10. I know for me, the first few classes that I took, I hated them. And then it was around number maybe 8, 9, 10, or 11 where I started to realize, don't push so hard. Like this doesn't, because I made it so much harder than it had to be. So it seems to be that's a very common number for a lot of people. 8, 9, 10 classes where they realize they don't have to push so hard. And once you get to that point, you've pretty much made it in yoga. So then it's more fun than it is work.
That's great. Yeah, I think back, and it was probably about the magic number for me as well. All those first classes, just mentally cussing out the yoga instructor in front of me.
Exactly, 100 for sure.
A lot of bad karma I put out in the world common. For sure.
Right.
Well, Sean, this has been an amazing conversation. Certainly learned a lot and had a lot of fun hearing some of your stories and experiences. If you had to leave the listener with one simple thing that they could plug into their lives, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, I think it's just, whenever we find ourselves, being stuck on, how things didn't go the way that was planned for us. I know that was always like my big struggle. This is how my life is going to be. This is going to be happening, and I'm going to have this and I'm going to have that is whenever life doesn't go our way, is just like being okay with like, hey, doesn't have to work out a certain way, and that there's other possibilities, and just, recognizing whenever we're spending too much time on how it was supposed to go, that really blocks us from, the opportunities that still exist, to us right in that moment.
I love that. Global pandemics can certainly help to teach us that lesson. Sean,
for sure.
Where can people go to find you and find your work and find all your offerings online?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. SeanConley.net, SeanConley.net. And on there is all my yoga stuff. If they're interested in the book, and the podcast is on there as well, so they can reach out to me with any questions. They can contact me there. So yeah, that'd be the best way.
That's great. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Sean Conley, thank you so much for all of your work, the challenges that you faced, a lot of disappointment and a lot of learning, and, to come out on the other side, with a different perspective and, adjusting to life, like you said, and all its challenges. And we're just so grateful for you and your work and for sharing that with us and for being on our show today. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you reached out. It was a pleasure being on your show. Very honored. And, yeah, thanks for your time, Casey. Have fun.
Absolutely. And then just before we get off, where can I find the application to be a Zamboni driver at the complex?
Well, yeah, actually it's a trash can that we fill up with hot water. So you have to pull a trash can and we connect a plastic tube, and on the end of the plastic tube is a towel.
I'm in. I'll do it. I'm in.
It does the job. Amazing. It's actually very addictive.
That's
great. My son would be like, Dad, it's flat, and I just keep going and go. But seeing the snow go from the snow on top to that slick ice. Oh,
that's
very
so
satisfying.
That's awesome.
Very satisfying.
Totally. Ready to tear it up. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate you.
Thanks again, Casey. Appreciate it.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.